And to follow there from Deputy Leddens, we've two people from Clare sitting above us who have no plan, wouldn't mind anything being connected from Clare to Limerick. Is that right, Caroline and Gordon? From the point of view is, and I'll just follow on again from Deputy Ledden, and he said that the infrastructure is not probably there within East Limerick at the moment, and I welcome the connectivity from Part as well, Adair, Newcastle West, Racky, all those areas. I welcome it now. I met him in Fines there during the week, but again, the infrastructure for Fines to develop is not actually there. Yes, there's land has been CPO'd for storage system there. Like we're talking about Glen, Fines, no sources of Skeeton, no sources. So we want to build there, but we've no infrastructure, and what's there at the moment is not. It's not even existent. It's beyond inadequate. It's not there. But from the point of view of East Limerick, the train passes through Kilmallock and doesn't stop. There was a train station there. The building is still there. The mart is adjacent to it. So can you imagine if they put in infrastructure in the likes of Kilmallock? What would it do for the training fire station that we were looking at in Kilmallock, where the lands and things were available in the area if the proper infrastructure was there? What would have that done for a fire training station? You'd have the likes of Celtic Engineering. But not only for Kilmallock. You go further out then and you see people from Kilfinnan, from Hospital, from Bruff. Anyone could use that as a transport to get into town. A connectivity, the rail line is there. All it needs is a stop-off. So it can stop off, people can board and go. And then if you wanted to put in a second line alongside it, it means that you could actually, for the point of businesses, commercial business within Kilmallock, you could actually have more commercial businesses that could actually use the freight train to get their transport to the port. Why couldn't it be used? And the rail line is actually there. And I spoke to Deputy about this actually during the week in Fines, and he said he's going to cycle out to meet me outside there, but he wants me to cycle as well, but I might use an engine in my one. But
could use an e-bike.
Use an e-bike, yeah.
Regulations aren't in yet for that.
No. But for what I'm saying here is, we do have, East Limerick seems to be getting a bit forgotten from that point of view of network. We have a rail line. We just need a stop-off where it comes to Charleville, stops at Charleville, but people in County Limerick have to go to Charleville to get the train station. They could actually get it in Kilmallock. And Kilmallock is a building town. It could actually help in all types of infrastructure and commercial entities within Kilmallock. The connectivity is there. So from that point of view, now, the other thing I want to ask is, because of inflation of materials, and Caroline touched on it there a while ago, a lot of developers or landowners that have zoned land at the moment, and you're talking about the tax coming in there, at the moment are afraid to build because of the cost incurred in the price of materials, the fluctuation of materials, the fluctuation of labour costs, the shortage of labour costs. And they're afraid to build because after the last year or two, they're into fixed price contracts, and most of the housing contractors work on a 6% ratio. Some have 10%, some have 6%. There's actually some of the larger contractors are actually working on 2% in industrial commercial. On 2%. Can you imagine the inflation, what would happen on materials? What would it do to those businesses that are massive employers? So a lot of the cost for building, and myself, I don't have a conflict. I'm a building contractor. I don't do any work for the council. So I only do private buildings ourselves, industrial and commercial. But I understand the market, and I understand where they're coming from, because they're looking at the financial institution to give them money to build. Then they're looking at the inflation costs, where they're saying, is it viable for us to build? And you mentioned it earlier on, how many contractors have went belly up because of this over the last number of years, and projects that we want to see. Look at the likes of Pallaskenry. How many houses are held up in that particular project because of a company folding? And again, that's why we're looking at delivery and affordable delivery. Whereas we could do something for that fall delivery, because most of the delivery from the point of view of inflation for materials and everything is actually driven by fossil fuels. And we have a 50% tax on that, on fossil fuels at the moment, which is actually driving the inflation further, which every contractor that has to go to work and every person that's working within that sector has a 50% tax before they leave home. So from that point of view, the government could do something about that and look at the tax regime. And it's not only construction, it covers farming, it covers everything else that feeds into the SMEs. 100% is in through fossil fuels, and the taxation system is actually stopping that. And most of the materials that are produced from the likes of insulation are based on a fossil fuel base anyway. All the transport network costs are all based on fossil fuels, which would actually, again, if the government truly wanted to get the housing models going, whether it is in the metropolitan area or in the metropolitan or in the rural areas, it could happen in each individual district. So from the point of view of contractors, do you find that there is contractors that are not actually going to the market? And I do understand the Mungwood site one time, the 2030, were trying to encourage by getting planning on it and getting the infrastructure ready to make it achievable for contractors to go in and build, even if it was only 20 houses at a time. They were trying to make it achievable. Do you find that there is not as much people coming to the market wanting to build?
Just to start, I'll hand to Carla, but to go back to your point, Deputy, on the railway, absolutely. I think what we need to do, and again goes back to Deputy Ledden's point, is pick the winners, pick the ones that can be done easy, quick, and get them started, and start kind of orientating people. A bit of behaviour change will start that. So I know that is in the plan with Éireann Road Éireann. Absolutely, on the inflation costs, and the department are helpful because they do look at it. They put it in every 6 to 8 months, have a look at it and see can they do an adjustment. Certainly, I know we are having discussions with a lot of developers and builders to try and make that cost, because they are under pressure with both supply chain and an inflation impact. So, but maybe Caroline has more details.
Sorry, Caroline, I just have one quick question because my time's run. It's for actually Gordon or even Sarah Notes, which Sarah didn't get in even yet. Yep. It's the quick question I have is on dereliction buildings that the process is starting on, and dereliction buildings are getting fines from the point of view of if they're going through a planning process. Is there something that can be done for people? Can that be taken off of the planning fees afterwards? So there's buildings held up getting fines for dereliction and they're in the planning process and they're held up on the planning side of it. What can be done for those to show them that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that they're trying to improve and they're trying to rebuild derelict buildings, but they're caught in the planning sector?
But you could argue the reason they've maybe come to planning is because they have the levy being imposed on them. Generally, a building, if it's derelict, it hasn't come derelict overnight. So generally, we'd argue people have been given, there's ample time for people to address it before it even gets to being on the register, before a levy begins to apply. Levies generally apply retrospectively. Inflation
and the cost of inflation stopping this from happening, as we've heard in other councils have actually said, inflation costs are actually the reason. It's actually historical problems that have caused this. It's not actually letting them go into the direction. They couldn't get the funding to do it because of inflation costs and banking sector.
Inflation is obviously a more recent issue. Generally, our view of things is that properties become derelict over a long number of years, including often decades.
Is something done on the fines for if they do manage to get their planning? Can there be something done with the fines that they've incurred while they're waiting for planning?
There are different pieces of legislation, so there isn't a trade-off between one and the other.
Perhaps just clarify. Yeah. Obviously, there's a difference between the derelict sites levies and the zoned land levies, which Deputy Donoghue was talking about. I think we're talking about two different processes there, are we?
Possibly.
Yeah. So I think Deputy Donoghue was talking about applications coming forward on the new residential zone tax levy. Yeah.
No, but I'm also talking about there was derelict buildings that were in County Limerick that are actually through a planning process, and while they're waiting for planning, they're being fined because they're derelict. And it's trying to find. You're right. Some of those buildings have started because the dereliction fine actually started the process. But on the other side of it, there's historical parts of it that people were trying to get the funding together, and the banks couldn't see it as a viable unit for a return. So it's just something for that garden.
There is some provision in the legislation to enter into a bond in lieu of paying the levies, and if you execute your plan of permission, then the levies wouldn't become payable, but the bond would be drawn in or pulled down if the person didn't go ahead with the development.
Thanks Mr. Daly. The next